All right, everyone, and welcome to the Delray Beach Chamber of Commerce's weekly webinar. So sorry about the delay. It took us a second to get on. If any of you live here in South Florida, you know that the weather's been a little bit crazy lately. So we're super excited today to have our presentation, Planning for the Future Starts Now. As always, please note that these webinars are posted on Facebook Live, they'll be on our YouTube channel, and they'll be on our Chamber website afterwards underneath the Webinars tab. We encourage you to type any questions that you have and put them down in the Q&A or chat box. We're going to go ahead and hold them, and then at the end we'll get to ask them all for you. So at this time, I would like to turn this over to Jason, who's going to go ahead and get us started on our presentation. All right, wonderful. So as I mentioned before, planning for the future starts now. So a little bit about this topic is business owners are busy people. So taking care of daily challenges requires time and effort. Preparing for the future is likewise important. Having a well thought out succession plan for your business ensures that your wishes are carried out as you desire. In this workshop, you'll learn the 5 steps every business owner should take to make certain that their business's success continues when a transfer of ownership takes place. So at this time, I would like to introduce to you our attorney speakers and tell you a little bit about them. We have Leah Forsters. I hope I'm not butchering that. You can go ahead and jump in, Leah, if I did.
It's just perch. It's easier than it looks.
I added too many syllables to that. So she is actually a skilled estate and trust attorney with extensive experience representing Florida clients in all areas of trust and estate administration and planning, asset protection and wealth management, business succession planning, and tax strategies. She has managed multi-million-dollar real estate transactions, including structuring deals and providing title assurance for both commercial and residential properties, and has worked with individuals to develop successful succession planning strategies to meet their goals and objectives. In addition to her law degree, Leah earned a Master's of Laws in Taxation and is a member of the Florida Bar Tax and Real Property Probate and Trust sections. Oh my goodness, that's a mouthful, Leah. Good for you. She is a senior counsel with Pinot Lopes. I'm going to butcher that last one, so if you want to jump in there, Leah.
Devereaux and O'Gara.
Oh my goodness, I'm not good at names, guys. Sorry. In the firm's Boca Raton office, located in Peninsula Plaza, 2424 North Federal Highway. To contact Leah, please call 561-362-2011 or email lfoertsch@pldolaw.com. Guys, all of this information is going to be linked in the descriptions down below. So if you missed that, you can feel free and watch it again, or you can just check down for that. So now on to Jason Palamisano.
Yes, good. That's good.
Perfect. All right. They're laughing at me, everybody. Is a distinguished Florida Bar Board certified lawyer in wills, trust, and estates law with over 10 years of extensive experience advising clients in a wide range of areas, including trust and estate planning and administration, wealth management, asset protection, charitable giving strategies, and in all matters of tax planning, including multinational tax and advising clients on business and succession planning. In addition, his practice includes preparing a wide variety of trusts, including grantor, irrevocable life insurance, special needs, and qualified personal resident trust, among others. In addition to his law degree, Jason earned a Master of Law in Taxation and graduated from Leadership Boca class of 2018. Wow, that's awesome, Jason. He is a senior counsel with Panoa. I'm going to have you go ahead and say that for me, Jason.
Panoa Lopes, Devereaux, and O'Gara.
Perfect. In the firm's Boca Raton office, located in Peninsula Plaza, 2424 North Federal Highway. To contact Jason, please call 561-362-2034 or email jpalmisano@pldolaw.com. Again, guys, this will be located in the description down below, and I'm sure Leah or Jason or And will be happy to answer any questions you have. So at this time, I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to these two. They've got an exciting presentation for us today, and I'm sure you guys are going to leave with a wealth of knowledge. So go ahead, guys, take it over.
Great. Thank you,
you.
Angel. Appreciate it. Yeah, so today we're going to talk about the importance of business succession planning. And it's really not a one-time transaction, but it involves years of preparation and can involve many transactions. And I think this quote does a great job of kind of highlighting some of those issues. And I'd like to read that. It says, business succession planning is planning for the orderly transfer of the management and ownership of a business to new managers and new owners to avoid a liquidation of the business, as well as unnecessary taxes and other expenses, and in a manner that carries out the family's non-tax objectives. So really, for the rest of our presentation, we're going to kind of unpack this and try to highlight some of the many issues that business owners face when they start talking about or thinking about transferring their business or selling their business. There's many issues that a business owners face, and some of those are highlighted here. One, should the owner sell the business during the owner's lifetime? You know, maybe they want to keep it for their children and keep it in the family, or not. Maybe it's maybe they're in an industry that's kind of a hot trend right now, and they want to capitalize on the market. And so they may think about, you know what, I've built this up to a place where it's in a good position to sell. Now is a good time to do that. And that involves many planning steps. Or, the second item, should the business be continued after the owner's death? The business owner may think, yeah, I'm going to pass this on to my children. They're going to take over. Well, the children may not want to continue on in the business. They might have other interests and pursue other dreams. So that's something else to consider and think about is, after I pass away, or if something happens and I do pass away unexpectedly, what's going to happen with my business, and how am I going to pass the ownership and the management of my business on to others? Third, who will control the business after the owner's death? This is an important one to affirmatively plan for. Oftentimes in the past, we've had clients where maybe they passed away unexpectedly and their estate plan was set up, but the estate plan provides for assets to be passed, for example, in further trust for the benefit of the surviving spouse. Okay, well, that's fine. But now the controlling interest of the business is the trust for the surviving spouse. And maybe the business owner wanted that, or maybe the business owner didn't want that. So it's good to affirmatively plan, again, for who's going to control the business after the owner's death. Also, with who's going to own the business, same principle there. The owner of the business, it can be specifically provided for in business documents or estate planning documents as to who's going to be the owner. For example, if certain children have expressed interest and have been participants during life in the business owner's business, then maybe they want to specifically provide for that business interest passing to the owner or to that child. And so again, affirmatively planning instead of leaving it in the event of an unexpected death is usually the best practice. Who will manage the business is important. Obviously, it might not be a family member. It might be a key employee that you want to have manage the business. And that can be laid out again in business succession documents and operating agreements or partnership agreements or what have you. And then finally, maybe another issue that business owners face is, will the owner's children be treated equally in the distribution of the owner's estate? If there is a child that you specifically pass a business interest to, and the business makes up a significant portion of the decedent's estate, then most people may want to leave their other children maybe an equal share of the estate if possible. So that takes some affirmative planning on the client's part to make sure that that's part of the estate plan. So you can see there's all these different issues that a business owner might want to think about and should think about as they transition their business either during life, after death, or in a sale.
And I think if I could
Sure.
hop in here, that this really, failure to plan here really embodies that old maxim that, failure to plan is a plan for failure. I think everyone who practices in this realm has sort of seen businesses go askew because there hasn't been a plan for what to do after somebody passes. And the typical example, and one that I've seen, at least a couple of times in my practice, is where you have a general partnership. You've got two guys that have gotten along really well. They've never thought to plan ahead because everything is ticking along nicely and people are happy and they're making money, and one of them passes away unexpectedly. Well, now the existing partner becomes a partner perhaps with the deceased partner's spouse, and that might not be something that was ever intended. The spouse may not be equipped to run the business or even want to run the business. And so really we can't overstate the need to plan enough.
Right, yeah, that's a good point. The 5 steps that we want to share with you today starts with step 1. And that's really to determine the advisors that are necessary in the planning process. And it's probably not going to be just one advisor. In fact, it could be many advisors. As you can see here, we've listed attorneys, from a family law attorney possibly to the business or corporate attorney. It could be the same person, but oftentimes it may not be. An experienced business succession planning and estate planning attorney. And just talking about the attorney's roles, family members who might have a significant business, and families might have different interests in the business, or they might have their own different estates, and they're represented by different attorneys. Each family unit, maybe a son is represented by a different attorney than the parents, and the daughter is represented by her attorney. So it's important for these attorneys to be on the same page, to be talking with each other, to understand how this business succession plan is going to affect their respective clients' estate, and if there's any planning that they might need to do. And so it's important that the attorneys be on the same page, be it estate planning practices or just maybe family issues, and of course the corporate attorney. The CPA obviously is very important. They are typically the one who knows the ins and outs of the business and handles all the finances. So definitely the CPA is a critical person involved in the succession planning process, and they really need to be involved from the early stages. Other individuals may be required, such as a business appraiser. Sometimes clients think their businesses are worth maybe a lot more or possibly a lot less, and they don't realize that the fair market value of a qualified business appraiser can give them a pretty good idea of maybe what the business could sell for, or if you're planning on transferring interest to a child or more remote descendant. A qualified business appraiser can help and with what that value would be. And frankly, if the IRS comes knocking on your door, sniffing around, and questions about any transactions you entered, it's good to have a qualified business appraiser involved to rely on as far as evaluation. a banker, a trust officer, maybe an insurance professional if there's going to be needs for life insurance to be part of the business succession plan, or a buy-sell agreement, something like that. Again, these are all of the individuals and maybe even more that could and should be involved in the transfer of your business or the sale of your business.
Okay, the second step we have outlined here is valuation. With respect to valuation, you want to determine a range of values of the business for planning purposes under various scenarios, which can include a leveraged buyout, an initial public offering, or the liquidation of the business, in addition to just the regular transactions that we're going to talk about. One of the things to keep in mind with valuation, as Jason stated with the appraiser, is that evaluation tends to be forward-looking. So we're going to look at the history of the business to date, but we're also going to look at contracts in hand, demand, which of course fluctuates, as well as any kind of projects that are in the process, and the value of owned assets. Mm-hmm. So some of the current issues that we have with respect to the pandemic, there have been shutdowns and partial shutdowns, which had an immediate and often devastating impact on value. So of course, the value from, or the diminished value from a shutdown isn't necessarily going to be the valuation going forward, but it is going to play a part. And with that, we have the complication of the PPP loans. During the PPP program, $519 billion was distributed under the program to various businesses to support their operations. The issue with that is some of those PPP loans are either contingently repaid or forgivable. So that's also going to affect valuation in that if you have a contingent liability, that liability can't be a dollar for dollar calculation. It has to be valued separately with the likelihood of payment in mind. So I think we're going to see some impact from that for some time to come, at least until that loan program expires. Right, our third step we have now are the family issues. So discussing the family's goals with the family members. In this respect, we want to have an open and honest conversation with the status holders and see what their goals and objectives are. Maybe have a family meeting where we get everybody together and see what people are thinking, whether family members can realistically come in and take over the business at any point in time. So in this respect, we want to realistically consider your kids, their strengths and weaknesses if we're transitioning control within the family. I've seen it, I'm sure Jason's seen it too, where people leave their business to their, for instance, 4 kids, thinking that having to work together will drive the kids together versus apart. And in my experience, that rarely works. If there's divisions, those divisions tend to be exacerbated when kids are forced to work together. So we don't want to necessarily have everybody become partners just by virtue of inheriting. We want to plan in place how it's going to be, how the management's going to be structured. So you also have the issue with an odd or even number of kids here. With an odd number of kids, you typically have one kid who feels like they've been left out of management decisions. With an even number of kids, you could end up with a deadlock. So further in this respect, we want to consider where there's blended families, such as later in life marriages and children from existing relationships and how they get along and who actually has the abilities and proclivities to continue to manage the business. And as Jason mentioned earlier, we want to consider the equalization of the estates. So with this, we want to consider retention of control and satisfaction of the family's estate planning objectives.
Yeah, and I think this is one of the most important issues. Obviously, I mentioned it previously, but it's so important to be in communication. If your plan is to pass the family business on to your children or key employees, because again, the children may not be interested in the business, and you would think you would pick that up, but sometimes the parents or the business owner may have dreams for their child, and they go to school with that particular purpose in mind, and then when they graduate from school, if they go to school, then they'll take over the business, and then something happens along the way where the child goes a different route, and that's fine, but you need to affirmatively plan for that. And deal with issues as far as control with existing owners, as Leah mentioned. Tiebreakers are important. If you have 2 children that are going to succeed you in business, what's the plan if they can't agree on a decision on the business? Is there a tiebreaker? Is there a third person that's involved? All that can be incorporated into succession planning documents. Other issues that could be frankly kind of fun to talk about is charitable issues with the family. If you have a successful business and you're in a position where you can make some significant gifts to charities, then you might be able to start a family foundation, and the children can be involved in choosing charities that are important to them. And those charitable gifts can be funded with business income, or even interest in a business could be transferred to a trust for charitable benefit. D and E on this is reduce transfer taxes and reduce income taxes. So these are going to be big issues. The transfer taxes means estate tax, gift tax, and generation skipping transfer tax. So estate tax, the exemption, as you may know, is very large in 2020. It's about $11.5 million per person. So a married couple can have $22-23 million free from estate tax. But if the business is more than that, then they could plan for that, and we can reduce those transfer taxes with the proper planning. A reduction in income taxes can also be achieved, especially if you're going to transfer the business after death. One way to do that is through understanding the concept that when you pass away, the basis in your assets is going to be what's called a stepped up fair market value basis in your assets. So if you pass away owning all of your business interests, then the basis in those business interests will be fair market value as of the date of death. And if your children then go and maybe want to sell your business interests, they're going to get a stepped up basis in that, which will significantly reduce income taxes. So that can be a huge benefit. And then reduce administration expenses. I think primarily something to keep in mind is if you can reduce any litigation expenses with attorneys, that's huge, because it's so expensive for litigation issues and administration issues. You're going to have some upon the passing or of the business owner's death, or the passing of their business interest to a successor. But if you can, again, pre-plan and have the plan in place where everyone knows what your intent was, that's going to significantly reduce administration expenses and be a big benefit to your family. One other thing I want to mention is, you might want to enter into a premarital agreement if one party is going to get married and they have a business interest before they get married. And then in the event of divorce, then it's pretty clear and as to what's going to happen with that business interest. So that's something to consider.
Okay, so now various exit strategies. Briefly, I'm going to consider mainly A and B, the sale of assets and sale of stock. That tends to be the most common that we see, especially in transactions to third parties. So first, the asset sale. The pros of an asset sale are you have a depreciation of those assets. You can get rid of the unassumed liabilities in doing an asset sale, at least as the buyer. You receive, as Jason mentioned earlier, a step up in basis. And you can largely, this part sounds terrible, but you can largely ignore the minority owners in the sale of assets. Sometimes you need consent of all shareholders. For some transactions you don't. So if you have somebody who's sort of vocal but has a minority ownership interest, you may be able to get around them with this. With respect to cons of an asset sale, there may have to be transfers or new leases and licenses, which can be expensive or administratively difficult to procure. You also need to transfer and retitle each asset that you're transferring, which increases those administrative costs. Assignable contracts may require consent of the other party. So if somebody purchases your assets rather than the stock, your landlord may not consider continuing to lease to them, for instance, or with any kind of mortgages or liabilities against those assets, the creditor would have to participate in terms of assigning those contracts. With respect to a stock sale, the pros in that arena are there's no need to retitle the assets, and you may avoid those transfer costs and taxes that I mentioned a moment ago. The cons of a stock sale are all assets and liabilities transfer at their carrying value. So you may not be able to see as much in terms of depreciation and things like that going forward. You also have the issue of unwanted liabilities. With a stock sale, you're selling the company. So all of the liabilities of that company go along with it. As the buyer's attorney, you'd want to make sure of what liabilities are outstanding and what your new buyer may need to address. Is the seller's attorney, you'd want to make sure there weren't hanging guarantees from a personal standpoint. In addition, one of the cons of a stock sale are those unknown liabilities. For instance, years ago, I was doing a closing for a pool maintenance company, and they had stored chemicals at a location that turned out to be an environmental liability. And I wasn't brought in until the point of closing, at which point there was no real way to deal with these potential environmental liabilities, and they were very difficult to value. So again, as Jason has said earlier, we definitely want to plan ahead here over several years and make some decisions about how to structure.
Yeah, other exit strategies involve a sale to an ESOP, which is an employee stock ownership plan, or to employees. If you are in a business that would lend itself to those types of plans, that can be very beneficial and very advantageous to the employees. A sale to family members, this is, with interest rates being so low, it's a great time to enter into sales transactions with family members. The interest rates for it, and it depends how long that you take back a note, but if you have a midterm range of 3 to 9 years on your note, then the interest rate is about 0.4%. Which is great. And it may just keep going down and down and down. So in this environment, it's a great time to consider a sale to family members, because they're going to have to pay low interest back to you. And it could be a very beneficial transaction and an efficient way to transfer interest to family members. A sale to grantor trusts, I'm going to talk about that in more detail on the next slide, but you can do some really neat planning opportunities with exit strategies using sales to grantor trust, transfers to grantor trust, and I'll talk about that more in the next couple slides. Another means of transferring your business interests may be to gift to family members during your life. I mentioned that each individual has about $11.5 million of exemption that they can use for transfer taxes. So you could gift business interests to your children or to your grandchildren in further trust or outright, and there won't be any transfer tax or gift tax owed on those transfers. So it might be a good time to gift to family members, and you can also structure those gifts in a way that the value of the business could be reduced 20% or 30% due to owning a minority interest and a lack of control interest. Because you're probably going to gift away, say if you're interested in gifting interests of your business to your children, you're not going to gift them your whole business, of course. You might gift away 1%, 2%, 3%, depending upon the value of the business. And if you gift away that small percentage of the business, then the IRS will allow you to take a reduction in the fair market value of that interest. And so you can leverage your gifting to family members during life if you do that and pursue that strategy. Of course, you can give or sell to family members at death. And one big thing, again, is the basis issue. When you give business interests to family members at death, they're going to have a step up in basis, which is good for the beneficiaries. So if they do some planning in the future and maybe they sell a portion to somebody, and that's going to be reduced income taxes for that beneficiary. Whereas if you gift interest to family members during life, then they're going to take what's called a transferred basis, and they're going to take whatever basis you have in the business. So if you've built up this business over 20 years, you're probably going to have a low basis in the business. And then your family member will take that same basis. And so if they go on to sell it, then they're going to have a larger income gain. So what I want to talk about now is gifting interest to what's called a GRAT, or a grantor retained annuity trust. And so this slide gives you a picture of what that looks like. And it's maybe a little bit complicated, but the general idea is that the grantor, that's the person who creates the trust, that's the business owner. So the grantor is in the upper left of the slide there. What they do in this transaction is they transfer assets to the GRAT. And the GRAT is a trust. And the individual's estate planning attorney can help them create this trust. But they create this trust that is called the GRAT, and they transfer assets into the trust. And so say that they transfer business interests into the trust, and it's $10 million. And so the grantor takes back an annuity payment, though, equal to that $10 million over a certain amount of years, say, for example, 10 years. So over 10 years, those annuity payments are coming back to the grantor. And so their estate is going to be receiving $10 million. But the benefit of this transaction is when that $10 million is transferred into the GRAT and it's invested, or if the business interests grow or those income interests are held within the trust, then all of that amount over the interest rate of 0.4% is going to be tax-free for the beneficiaries of that trust. So that can be significant, because if you transfer $10 million into a trust like this and invest those funds, then that could grow significantly, and it's going to be out of the grantor's estate, and it's going to be held for the benefit of the heirs, and it's going to be tax-free. And that's what's shown on the right. At the end of the term, the heirs are going to be able to get the amount that has grown over the $10 million in our example. One last thing to mention is that the gift tax from the GRAT formation, if any, is going to be minimal. And the income tax on the income generated by the GRAT could be paid by the grantor. So even though the grantor is not going to be getting any benefit from the GRAT, they can pay income tax on it, and that will further reduce their estate, and which could be good. Some grantors don't like to pay the income tax, but if they have a very significant estate and they're looking to reduce their estate for estate tax, then paying the income tax on the GRAT could be helpful. And then the other thing I just want to highlight quickly is what's called an installment sale to a intentionally defective grantor trust, or an IDGIT. This one is similar in that you transfer sell your interest to a trust, and then the grantor takes back a note. And the benefit of this is that the growth on the interest, if it's above the applicable federal rate, again, which is historically low right now, the growth on those assets transferred is going to avoid estate tax, and the interest rate being paid back to the grantor is low too. So the taxable income on the grantor trust can be paid by the grantor, which will further reduce their estate. And there's no gift tax involved because it's not a gift, it's a sale. So in this situation, this plan, again, can significantly reduce the growth of an individual's estate using this concept. Because if you think about $20 million, and if you're 50 years old, and that $20 million grows over 20 years, that can be hundreds of millions of dollars over time. Whereas if you use this transaction, that growth can largely be held in the trust. You're still getting that $20 million back for the grantor to be able to use. And so it can be significant family and planning opportunities for the family. Of course, all other assets have to be considered, as far as, obviously you want to make sure that you have significant assets to continue to make and live off of, and that sort of thing. But these are just kind of big highlighted views of maybe some planning opportunities that you can do with trust, transferring interest back to the trust and taking back either a note or an annuity. And then our last step is really to take action.
Start planning.
Yeah, start planning.
Sure.
So consultants have said really that, for about 10 years before retirement, is really a good time to start thinking about putting these plans and these steps in place, or maybe 5 years before transferring management of your business. And so, and our recommendation is start thinking about an appropriate succession plan, maybe with alternatives, because again, when we first talked about in our presentation, you have all these issues to think about with your family, with the sale, with the transfer, what do you want to have happen? All these different advisors. And so, it can be overwhelming, I think, if you think about it all at once, but it's really a process. And so, I think it's important to take action, maybe meet with your business attorney and say, hey, I've been thinking about what I'm going to do when I want to transfer my business or sell my business. What's the next step?
I think this is also where we kind of, as Jason just mentioned, we start pulling in those suggested experts that you're going to talk to. So like, for instance, B, determine the cash needs of the business during the implementation of the suggested plan. You would certainly want your CPA to be part of this step, to go through cash flow analysis, as well as, what kind of tax liabilities there will be during this time. And
there's advisors, not just the attorneys and CPAs and life insurance people, but there's specific business succession advisors that can act as a quarterback, so to speak, to help everybody involved with that. And that kind of goes to point C, where you listen to describe the steps to carry out the suggested plan and coordinate its implementation. Well, you're not going to be able to do that probably, but with the help of advisors and maybe a specific advisor, depending upon the size of your business and what you want to have accomplished, those can be laid out and give you a roadmap of years down the road and objectives throughout. And so that's an important thing to do. And then lastly, put in place a procedure for a review of the plan and its implementation. Once you take the initiative to set up a plan and it's laid out, things are likely going to change, and it's a process, but at least you're starting, and at least you're looking forward to the plan and having the necessary business documents, the estate planning documents in place. And so we think that's an important thing to do, is just take that first step. And so with that, Angel, that's the end of our presentation, but I don't know if there were questions.
Wonderful. So I'm going to pop back on. I'm going to have you guys pop back on as well.
Okay.
Whenever you get the chance, you should just be able to go ahead and start your own video. As always, guys, I just want to go ahead and repeat this just in case anybody missed it or was let in a little bit late. This is live on Facebook. It has been recorded, so it will be posted to our Chamber's website underneath the webinars tab, as well as our YouTube. So you're definitely welcome to share this with anybody that you think might need the information. I know that I feel like I could have listened to you guys really talk like all day, because there was so much information that
it's a lot.
I almost felt myself like, okay, well, now what about this? Well, now what about this?
Yeah, it's a lot of information. I get it. So, and I think hopefully maybe it'll trigger someone to think about, oh yeah, I heard someone mention that. Maybe I should go talk to my advisor about this particular issue or something like that, because it is a lot, and it can be overwhelming, which I think is why business owners, they're busy running their business, right? And they have families maybe, and they have life going on. And so, planning for the business succession plan may not be at the top of their list of things to do or to think about, but it's pretty critical.
No, absolutely. And the thing about planning is that it can be so overwhelming. And I really love presentations like this, because it starts to break it down in manageable bits where you don't feel so scared to tackle that topic, or so, oh, I'm going to push it off till later. You really look at it and you say, oh, okay, well, I could do this next week, or I could do this, within the next year and get it taken care of. I know for myself, and I'm sure this reached, a lot of people as far as information being relevant to them. But like, for example, I'm recently married, and, we're at that beginning stages of kind of that like family life, but my husband owns a business, and I'm just starting to kind of dip my toes into the water, and I'm like looking at all of these things they're talking about. I'm like, oh, I never would I have like thought to ask or bring that up. So it's definitely something that I'll be going back and watching, and probably doing a little bit of research on my own.
Call us.
You guys as well. Yes, no, I mean, it's very, very fascinating. So guys, if you do have any questions, please go ahead and type them. I have a couple of questions here. So I'm just going to talk back to maybe like the beginning of your presentation. So valuation, is there a timeline or an amount of times that this should be revisited? More specifically, how often should this be done? Because I know you touched on, for example, we're in the pandemic and, you know, your valuation might have dropped. So is this like a once a year, 10 years? What would you say?
Yeah, and it's really based on the timing of what your plan objectives are. For example, you may have remembered I mentioned part of your estate plan might be transferring business interests to your children. Well, in order to do that, typically the IRS is going to want to see a business valuation by an appraiser, a business appraiser that can be upheld in court, or they might challenge you, because a lot of times you can get significant discounts in the transfer of your business, especially now, maybe during the pandemic. Business may not be doing that great, your receivables aren't that great, so it could be a good time to transfer a business interest. And so this might be a time, if your objective is to transfer to children, to get a valuation. Of course, if you're going to sell, and in those two diagrams with the trust that I had on there, if you're going to transfer interest to the trust or sell interest to one of those trusts, you want to get a business valuation done by an expert so that you're just not kind of making up a number based on what a couple of advisors said, but you really have an expert in there. And of course, if you want to sell your business, then you're going to have valuations done. I mean, the parties involved and the advisors involved will have you do a sale of a business and get a valuation done. So it really, I think it really depends on what you're trying to accomplish. But that's going to be a pretty common thing, because and if you transfer interest to your family members, like each year, maybe you want to transfer a little bit each year, it's probably good to at least get it updated, that valuation updated each year by that same person. And it should be less expensive each year because they already have the base of the plan, but maybe something in the business changed and that sort of thing. So so I don't think you need a business valuation if you're not doing any transferring every single year. Right. But yeah, those would be my comments on that.
Okay, Leah, anything?
Yeah, I agree. I think in part it has to do with the type of business too, right? Like if you've got something that is service-based and it's fairly consistent, it probably, when in the year, is probably less important. A lot of cash-based businesses, they sort of close their books with an eye to not have it showing profitability. So that makes it a little harder. When do they want to have a valuation? Because it doesn't necessarily want to be year-end closing. And then we see things politically, right? There were some various discussions around Chinese trade deals. If you're a company who, for instance, maybe repackages or compiles something of components that are generated from China, you want to consider the political climate and what's happening in trade at the time. So it's hard to answer that with a one word, right. 6 months out.
What's going on in the world, what your business is in relation to that.
Yeah, absolutely.
I guess that's why it's good to kind of just keep tabs on those types of things. So I love that you guys brought up about, you've seen it before, the family business that's owned and then, they pass away and the kids don't want it. And, it might be old Uncle Sal's hot dog eatery and, everybody loves it, but the kids were like, oh no, I don't want to do that. So in relation to that, to family, and I suppose it would be dependent on age and of course, a personal conversation prior. Would you say it's a good idea if you are passing it along to one or, splitting it among your children, to start including them in those meetings as well, as opposed to just having like a personal offline conversation with them? Like, is it advisable to start bringing them to those meetings with you?
I think to the extent that it's constructive to have like a family meeting, I think the more family members involved, the better. Sometimes kids just expect that they're going to inherit equally, despite the fact that one's been involved and, for instance, like two haven't. I think, as Jason talked about, avoiding litigation, I think that's an easier thing to have open and honest communication with on the front end, to the extent that your family can bear it. There are some families that these kinds of discussions are just out the window. So we really have to look at kind of the family dynamic in deciding who to be involved.
Wonderful.
Yeah, I think too that communication is so important, right? So, but every family is unique as well. So, the family dynamic, every family is going to be different, and it may be appropriate to have a family meeting and everyone attends, and so everyone's in the open and in the know about what the business owner is expecting and anticipating, and what his or her desires are, and then the kids can chime in or something. But then other families that may not be a good situation because for whatever reason. So I think you have to be a little bit sensitive about that. But it is important, I think, generally, to have open communication and start involving, especially if a child or a successor is interested in the business, and bringing them to certain meetings and getting them involved. I think it's good.
Wonderful. Yeah, I think I have this like little fairy tale in my head of the person with the big castle, and all of a sudden they pass away, and it's like, oh my God, this fell into my lap. But that's not.
And that's the thing too, because we talk about planning, but if you don't plan, there's a default plan in place almost for you, right? So if something happens and you pass away, or if you're incapacitated, then, and if there's no organizational documents like a operating agreement or a partnership agreement that talks about who's going to be the next manager, or what have you, or a buy-sell agreement, then and if you pass away, for example, and there's no estate planning documents, then it's going to go according to Florida law, which maybe all to your spouse, or maybe half to your spouse, or kids from a different marriage, and then all of a sudden, a blended family may not get along the best, and it can be kind of messy.
It can be messy.
It can be, yeah. And unfortunately, oftentimes without planning, it does get a little bit messy. And so, again, it's good to be as proactive as possible and try to implement your plan as soon as possible, and get started, because it'll change, and that's fine. But I think it's important to get started.
Yeah, it's definitely a living plan. I mean, we would roll with the punches. So is business ebbs and flows.
Just because you set something, it doesn't mean it needs to stay like that. You can revisit and kind of reevaluate later. So with that in mind, when is the best time to start the process of packaging the business for sale?
Yesterday. No, as early as possible.
If that's their objective, is to sell, then that's something to talk to your advisors about. And the earlier the better. Like Leah said, it might be that, for example, maybe your investment advisors can give some really good advice about your particular company in the area of our, like if you make masks, right, or gloves. I mean, that's a great time to sell, maybe because of our business environment. Or maybe if you have a travel industry, it's not a good time, maybe because it's so low, or you might want to wait. So if you're thinking about selling them, but like Leah said, it's always good to talk to advisors and get their opinion on it. And then instead of just saying, oh, I have to sell within the next 2 weeks for whatever purpose, that's not a good place to be in, because then you're going to be at the whim of the buyer. And so
is that something that you would even maybe consider, like in the infant stages of starting a new small business? Like, is that something that you kind of keep in mind and keep those meetings if you're just getting started, or no, it's something you want to wait until after your business is getting a return on profit, for example?
You mean about what, selling?
Yeah, for small businesses, like, because you're like, oh, start planning yesterday. So if it,
well, I mean, yeah.
I'm just trying to clarify, because I don't like, is it, and I know you can't give an exact timeline, of course, because that's not, that can't be accurate for everybody. But is it like, all right, once I'm off the ground and running, like, what's the?
I mean, I think it's okay to have something in the back of your mind, but if you just start your business and it's not worth anything, you can want to sell it. No one's going to pay you anything for it, because it's not worth that much, right? But if you start out and maybe you have a goal of selling it in 5 to 10 years, and you have sales goals and income goals, and because of that it's valued and it continues to grow up, then that's something to consider. And so I think maybe starting out, and I wouldn't necessarily think that you want to consider selling it right away, but as it grows,
some people it's their baby, but
yeah, and some people, it just might be something that they don't even think about really until someone comes to them out of the blue and says, hey, we want to merge, or we want to do something. And I understand maybe we're talking more small businesses, but in Palm Beach County, there's some very significant businesses as well, and so it's kind of range on the whole spectrum. But Yeah, I think the sooner the better, but understanding that if you just started your hot dog stand,
To go back to the hot dog example.
it might not sell for as much as you anticipate.
I think, I've been in practice for 15 years, and I think Jason's about the same. The stories that stand out to you are not the ones that you did this perfect planning for and it was implemented and you never heard from them again. The stories that stand out are, the guy died unexpectedly on a trip to Costa Rica, and now his service-based business is standing still and losing customers by the day. So the value is diminishing to the surviving spouse, the kids, whatever. Or you have somebody in a professional capacity, a dentist or something. And again, we're looking at that unexpected passing, and there's nobody to step in. And as those customers are going to other dentists because there's nobody here to service them, that business isn't getting more valuable. So I think,
or even with the dentist or practice exam, even with the law practice, it might be a slow transition, right? So maybe you and the person you're buying a practice from work together for 2-3 years, and they, transition patients over time, and then you can work out a deal to pay X amount to the seller over time. I mean, that could be a very kind of smooth and methodical transition, as opposed to an unexpected occurrence where they're disabled and they can't work anymore, and all of a sudden, they have to sell, that type of thing. So that's something to consider, because every business is so unique. And so that's why, again, you really have to talk to your advisors again about your particular set of circumstances, and then and see kind of how the plan lays out.
Right. So true to that, guys. Plan is what I'm gathering.
That's our watchword.
So what are some of the potential consequences of not planning? I know you guys touched on some stories, but if you want to, maybe elaborate on that a little further.
Well, I mean, one that comes to top of mind is when something happens to a manager or an owner of a business, and then all of a sudden, maybe two owners or two partners, and one of the partners is now all of a sudden a partner or a manager with someone that they didn't expect to be, like a surviving spouse or someone and it just doesn't work out. That's not a good situation. And if there's no business agreements in place to determine who's going to have the authority to do so, then all of a sudden there's deadlock, and they're head to head with each other. And then all of a sudden, instead of focusing on growing your business, you're focused on resolving internal issues and management issues, or ownership issues. And then all of a sudden you might have to go to court and get other attorneys involved, and it gets expensive. Mm-hmm. So that can be a consequence that we see, unfortunately, quite often, is without planning, and then that particular person's interest passed to a surviving spouse or a trust for somebody as part of their estate planning documents, then it's unexpected. And that can cause a little bit of frustration and legal issues to be resolved with somebody.
Could lead to that forced sale or even liquidation and bankruptcy, which is not the desired outcome.
And that can be handled with like a buy-sell agreement, for example. If you and your partner, if Leah and I were in business with each other, and then I pass away, and Leah could have insurance on my life to buy my interest out, so that she's not working with somebody that she doesn't want to work with. And that's fairly straightforward planning. But oftentimes it doesn't happen. But that gives those partners, Leah and I, we are planning what we want to have done with our business. Right. If something happens to her, what does she want? What do I, talk about those types of things. And the consequence of not doing that is like you're subject to the default rules, right? So if those default rules are in an operating agreement, then that's what's going to happen. If there is no operating agreement, then it's going to be the Florida statutes or Florida case law. Or then you have Florida attorneys involved, and it gets really expensive. So you want to take control of those situations as much as possible.
I feel like I'm learning so much. Like it sounds like it's being put so simply that I'm like, oh, okay, I got it. I'm going to bring some paperwork over to my husband. Like, look what I did today.
That's our desired outcome from this talk.
Yeah.
So what should one do with the proceeds after the sale?
Well, so if you pre-plan, again, going back to those slides with the trust, if you transfer interest to a trust, And let's take it for example, and if you're fortunate enough to have your business go in an IPO, an initial public offering, and you're going to see this huge windfall from the sales proceeds, then you can do some pre-planning to make sure that you minimize your transfer taxes. So if your proceeds are going to be hundreds of millions of dollars, then there are going to be some really neat planning to make sure that's not part of your estate. But you might want to transfer half of that because you may not need hundreds of millions of dollars to live on.
Right.
And instead of dying with hundreds of millions of dollars and paying half of that in estate tax, you can do some nice planning with the proceeds or before the sale to minimize that. And yet, when that does sell, then that trust will hold those proceeds for the benefit of your children or for their descendants. Other neat things we've seen with clients is you have now, maybe after the sale, you can do some neat charitable planning with those proceeds. And you can do an analysis of what maybe your lifestyle is and how much income you need, and do an evaluation on returns and income generated over time. And then you say, okay, we have this much set aside to meet our needs. And then, why don't we start a foundation or a donor advised fund, and we can start giving to charity? Or that's kind of a neat thing for business owners to do that we've seen. During life, they can benefit those schools or charities that they found important to them. And so that's an option. And of course, you can do some neat estate planning with that too. You can provide for family members and do some really neat charitable planning. So, or not only charitable, but transfer planning to descendants. So,
No, I love that.
Proceeds. Yeah, the proceeds are important to think about though before sale and then after sale too.
Why before sale?
Well, before sale, you can take advantage of those trusts, and you can limit some of that gain that's coming into your estate. So for example, if you say, okay, I'm going to sell my business next year, well, then you can transfer maybe half your business interest to a trust for the benefit of your children, and then keep half, keep 50%. So next year when it sells for $10 million, you get $5 million based on the business interest that you own, and then this trust for the benefit of your children gets $5 million. And you set that up in a way because you knew that you didn't need or want that $5 million. And so now that $5 million is out of your estate, free from transfer tax if you should die, which benefits them. And then those proceeds in that trust build up over time for the benefit of your descendants. And that can really minimize taxes over the years.
And maximize the return to your descendants.
Yeah.
So it works out really neat on both sides.
Whereas if you didn't do that planning beforehand, and you kept all of your interest and you sold it for $10 million, and then after the sale you transferred it to a trust, you can still do that, but now you're using $5 million of your exemption, whereas maybe you didn't have to do that before. You could have minimized the transfer tax used before the sale. I don't know if that made sense or not, but there's some good pre-planning to do and to take advantage of when you have some of those significant transactions.
Awesome. Well, so we're rounding up on our 1:30 time frame. Thank you so much for all of your questions. Anybody who's watched or who will watch this after the fact, please reach out to Leah and Jason. I'm going to have their emails linked down below. As you guys can see, they're willing and ready to answer any questions. It seems like even my little simple small questions, they were ready to go for it. So please reach out, and thank you for joining us. You can join us next week as well for our next weekly webinar every Tuesdays at 12:30. Did you guys want to say anything? Did you want to leave anybody with any sort of little tidbit or round out?
I'm not that quick, but I really appreciate the opportunity.
Yeah, seriously, we've enjoyed speaking today, and if anyone has any questions about anything, they can feel free to reach out to us, and we'll do our best to help.
Yeah, absolutely. We might even have to have you guys back in December. I love having anybody back that their first presentation is really fascinating to listen to. So thank you again for joining us, and thank you everybody for watching. Have a great day.
Thank you.
Thank you.